An elderly woman collapses in a hospital lobby. Staff barely glance at her, because in this place, money decides who lives and who suffers. But what they don't know? Big Shaq is watching. And when a giant moves, the whole system shakes. This isn't just about one patient. It's about power, corruption, and a reckoning no one saw coming. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where you're watching from. Share in the comments below. Mercy Hospital stood tall in the heart of the city, a monument of glass and steel that gleamed under the afternoon sun. From the outside, it looked like a sanctuary of healing, a place where the sick found comfort, where the injured found relief. But inside, the air was different. It wasn't filled with the warmth of compassion or the urgency of care. Instead, it carried a cold detachment, an invisible barrier that separated the privileged from the forgotten. Inside the bustling lobby, patients sat in pristine chairs, some flipping through glossy magazines, others murmuring into their phones. The walls were adorned with awards, plaques boasting of excellence in private health care. But the truth lived beneath the polished surface. Here, money spoke louder than pain. An elderly woman, Eleanor Carter, 82 years old, clutched her chest as she stepped through the revolving doors. She wasn't dressed in designer clothes. She didn't carry a leather handbag or wear a watch that cost more than a car. She was just a woman in a faded cardigan and sensible shoes, her silver hair pulled back into a bun that had loosened through the day. She looked like somebody's grandmother, because she was. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps as she made her way toward the front desk. The pain in her chest had started that morning, a dull ache that had grown sharper, more insistent. She had ignored it at first, chalking it up to old age, to the burdens of life pressing down on her bones. But by noon, she could barely stand. She gripped the counter, her knuckles white. "Excuse me," she said, her voice raspy. I think I need to see a doctor." The receptionist, a young woman with perfect nails and an air of practiced indifference, barely glanced up. "Name?" she asked, tapping on her keyboard. "Eleanor Carter," she managed. "Please, it hurts. I can't breathe." The receptionist sighed, her fingers moving lazily over the keys. "Do you have an appointment?" Eleanor swallowed. "No, but—" "No insurance on file," the receptionist cut in. "This is a private facility, ma'am. Without insurance or an appointment, there are wait times." Eleanor's chest tightened, not just from the pain, but from something worse, the realization that she was nothing more than an inconvenience here. She turned slightly, glancing at the other patients waiting. Some were called in almost immediately, ushered behind frosted glass doors, their names spoken with the kind of respect she wasn't afforded. And then, just as she was about to plead, a woman in a fur coat walked in, a teacup poodle nestled in her arms. The receptionist's posture changed instantly, straightening, alert. "Mrs. Whitmore, you're here for Bentley's checkup, yes?" Eleanor blinked in disbelief. The dog. The dog was getting seen before her. The world blurred at the edges. She felt weak, unsteady. "Please," she whispered, gripping the counter. "I need help." A new voice entered the scene, sharp, authoritative, dismissive. "Ma'am," said Victoria Langley, the head nurse, her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, her lips pressed into a thin, unimpressed line. The kind of woman who thrived in places like this, where power wasn't measured in kindness, but in control. "You need to take a seat," Victoria said, her tone flat. "We'll call you when we can." Eleanor wanted to argue, to beg, but her legs wobbled. She turned, stumbling toward the nearest chair. No one offered to help her. No one even looked. Across the lobby, Shaquille O'Neal sat in the waiting area, scrolling through his phone, waiting for his routine checkup. At 7 feet tall, he was impossible to miss, though he had tried to dress down. A simple hoodie, dark jeans, a baseball cap pulled low. It didn't matter. He was Big Shaq, and even when he wasn't trying to be noticed, people stole glances, whispered his name. He wasn't paying much attention, until he heard the sharp tone of Victoria Langley. His eyes lifted. He spotted the old woman immediately. He recognized the look in her eyes, not just pain, but something worse. A kind of humiliation that shouldn't exist in places meant for healing. His mother, Shaquille O'Neal, had raised him to respect elders, to watch out for those who couldn't fight for themselves. He'd been raised to understand the weight of dignity. And what he was witnessing right now? This wasn't just oversight. This was cruelty. Eleanor tried to sit, but she missed the chair slightly, her body too weak. She braced herself against the armrest, trying to regain her balance. No one moved to help. Shaq felt his chest tighten. This isn't right. He shifted forward in his seat, placing his phone on the side table. For a moment he debated stepping in, saying something, doing something. But then he hesitated. Not because he was afraid, but because he understood power. Sometimes the best way to dismantle a system wasn't to shout in the moment. It was to study it first. He needed to know exactly how deep this rot went. So, he sat back and watched. Watched as Eleanor clutched her chest, wincing. Watched as the hospital staff ignored her. Watched as a man in a designer suit was immediately led through the doors, greeted with smiles. Watched as the receptionist whispered something to Victoria, who smirked. And then, he saw Eleanor Carter close her eyes. For a second, he thought she was just resting, trying to breathe through the pain. But then her body tilted slightly to the side, her hands slipping off her lap. No one noticed. Not the receptionist. Not Victoria. Not anyone. Shaq's stomach dropped. No. He was on his feet before he even realized it. The hesitation was gone. He strode across the room, past the oblivious staff, his voice cutting through the sterile air. She's not breathing. That was all it took. Suddenly, heads snapped toward Eleanor, people scrambling. Now, they cared. But Shaq wasn't just watching anymore. He was making sure they'd never forget. Because this was just the beginning. Eleanor Carter sat hunched in the stiff waiting room chair, her breath shallow, her frail fingers clutching the fabric of her cardigan as if holding herself together. The pain in her chest hadn't eased. If anything, it had worsened. Hours had passed. The large clock on the wall ticked away, indifferent to her suffering. She had watched as patient after patient was called, their names spoken with respect, their needs met with urgency. But her name? It was never spoken. Across the lobby, the hospital staff moved with cold efficiency, tending to those who fit their unspoken criteria: wealth, status, power. Eleanor had none of those things. What she had was pain. But that wasn't enough. Behind the front desk, two nurses whispered, casting quick glances at her between giggles. "She's still here?" one of them asked. The other smirked. Guess she didn't get the hint. Eleanor lowered her head, pretending not to hear. But she did. Every word. A sharp bark cut through the air, and Eleanor looked up just in time to see the receptionist kneeling beside a small poodle, stroking its fur with exaggerated affection. The owner, the same wealthy woman from earlier, was all smiles. "Bentley's got a little cough," she said, voice dripping with concern. "I just can't bear to see him suffer." The receptionist nodded sympathetically. "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. We'll have Dr. Reynolds see him right away." Eleanor's grip tightened on her cardigan. The dog. The dog was getting treated before her. She felt the humiliation settle in her chest, heavier than the pain. The kind of humiliation that didn't come from insults or shouts, but from being made invisible. She had raised children, built a life, survived wars, outlived friends and family. She had earned her place in this world. But right now, in this hospital, she was nothing. Across the hospital, Shaquille O'Neal was hearing something he couldn't ignore. Shaq sat in one of the back hallways, waiting for his final test results. The checkup had been routine. He had done them every year since his playing days, ensuring his health was in top condition. But today felt different. The energy in the hospital was wrong. He could feel it in the way the nurses spoke, the way the front desk operated like a VIP club, the way certain patients got ushered into rooms without a wait while others, like Eleanor, were left in limbo. It was nothing new. He had seen it before. Money and power always bent the rules, but knowing it existed and watching it happen in real time were two different things. Then he heard them. Two doctors, both in pristine white coats, walking down the hall, talking just loud enough for him to hear. "Waste of resources," one of them muttered. "The old ones. Half of them don't even make it past treatment." Shaq's jaw tensed. The other doctor chuckled. "Tell me about it. I had one last week, came in with stage 4 cancer. No insurance, no family. Just sitting there, waiting for a miracle. You know what happened?" His colleague smirked. "They sent him home?" "They sent him home." They both laughed. Shaq's hands curled into fists. He had to remind himself to breathe. There was no shame in their voices. No hesitation. This wasn't just a mistake. This was the system working exactly the way they wanted it to. His mind flashed back to the waiting room, to Eleanor, to the way they hadn't even looked at her. Then something deeper stirred inside him. A memory. Shaq was 15, tall for his age, but still growing into himself. He had just gotten home from school, tossing his backpack onto the couch when he heard his mother's voice from the kitchen. "Shaquille, come here," she called. He stepped inside, the smell of cornbread and fried chicken in the air. His mother, Shaquille O'Neal, stood by the sink wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her eyes were warm, but there was a look in them that meant she was about to teach him something important. She placed a plate of food on the table. Next to it, a second plate. Empty. "Eat," she said. He sat down, confused. "What's the other plate for?" His mother took a seat across from him. "For someone who's hungry." Shaq frowned. "But no one else is here." Lucille folded her hands. "That's not the point." Shaq looked at her, waiting for an explanation. She leaned in slightly. "Son, you got size. You got talent. One day, you're going to have money, influence, power." She nodded toward the empty plate. "And when that day comes, I need to know something." "What?" Her voice was firm. "Are you the kind of man who fills this plate for himself? Or do you fill it for someone else?" Shaq looked down at the plate, the message sinking into his bones. It wasn't just about food. It was about how you used what you had. Who you saw, who you ignored, who you fought for. Shaq blinked, the memory settling deep in his chest. The answer had always been clear. He stood up. He had heard enough, seen enough. Eleanor was still in the waiting room when he passed through, her head resting lightly against the back of the chair. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, her body visibly weaker than before. Shaq had the power to fix this moment. He could have walked straight to the desk, demanded a doctor, paid her medical bills on the spot, and maybe, for today, that would have solved her problem. But that wasn't enough. Because what about tomorrow? What about the next Eleanor Carter? This wasn't about fixing one moment. This was about changing the whole damn system. Shaq exhaled, adjusting his hoodie as he strode toward the exit. He wasn't walking away. He was planning. The moment Eleanor Carter collapsed, the room barely reacted. There was no rush of nurses, no urgent paging of doctors, no scrambling of medical staff, just a sigh. A collective, unbothered exhale from the receptionist and the attending nurse, as if her frail body hitting the cold tile floor was more of an inconvenience than an emergency. One nurse leaned over the desk, chewing her gum lazily. "Well, guess she finally gave up." A few chuckles. Someone muttered, "Took her long enough." A doctor, young, bored, tapping on his tablet, strolled over, crouching beside Eleanor's unconscious form. He didn't check her vitals right away. He just stared at her, waiting, as if debating whether she was worth the effort. Then, with a sigh, he waved over an orderly. "Get her to a room before she scares off the real patients." The orderly lifted Eleanor onto a stretcher. The wheels squeaked as they rolled her down the hallway, disappearing into the depths of Mercy Hospital. She was finally being treated. Not because they cared, but because they didn't want a dead body in their lobby. Shaquille O'Neal had left Mercy Hospital hours ago, but his mind never did. He had tried to go about his day, tried to shake the feeling that had settled in his chest like a weight. But the image of Eleanor, small and unseen, lingered. The laughter of the staff echoed in his ears. He wasn't a man who acted on impulse. His mother had taught him that. You don't throw your weight around just because you can. You throw it around when it matters. And right now, it mattered. Shaq pulled the hood of his sweatshirt over his head, tugging it low enough to shadow his face. He wasn't here as Shaquille O'Neal, NBA legend, millionaire, businessman. He was here as just another man, another set of eyes. He stepped through the sliding glass doors, his massive frame moving through the hospital's sterile halls with quiet purpose. No one noticed him. No staff members snapped to attention. No forced smiles. No, "Mr. O'Neal, how can we help you?" Because they didn't know who was watching. Shaq moved down the hallway, passing rooms filled with people like Eleanor, people whose lives depended on the mercy of a system that saw them as a burden, not a priority. A young woman sat by her father's bedside, holding his hand. The heart monitor beeped slowly. No doctors in sight. An elderly man in a wheelchair stared at the ceiling, his oxygen tank nearly empty. No nurse rushing to refill it. Shaq kept walking, his jaw tight. His phone was already in his hand, the camera rolling. "You ain't here for a checkup, are you?" "Thought that looked like you." Shaq paused. The voice came from a janitor mopping the hallway floor, a man in a faded uniform with tired eyes and a knowing smirk. Leo Saunders. Shaq had seen men like him before, men who had once been on the path to something greater, only to have the world rip it out from under them. Leo leaned on his mop, sizing Shaq up. "You ain't here for a checkup, are you?" Shaq smirked. "Not anymore." Leo chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, didn't think so." He glanced around, then stepped closer, voice dropping. "You see it, don't you?" Shaq nodded. "I see it." Leo exhaled. "Good, 'cause I've been seeing it for years." He gestured down the hallway. "They call it Mercy Hospital, but there ain't no mercy here, only rules. And the number one rule?" He smirked bitterly. "Rich lives matter. Poor lives, they just take up space." Shaq studied him. "You always been a janitor?" Leo let out a dry laugh. "Hell no. Used to be a med student, top of my class." Shaq raised a brow. Leo sighed, glancing down at his mop. "Did my rotations right here in this very hospital. Had big dreams. Thought I was gonna help people." He shook his head. "Then one day I get called into an evaluation meeting. Told my scholarship was reassessed. Some funding fell through." He met Shaq's eyes. "Translation? I wasn't the right fit for their future." Shaq's jaw tightened. "And now?" Leo smirked. "Now? I cleaned the floors I was supposed to be saving lives on." Shaq was silent for a moment. Then he held up his phone. Leo's eyes flickered to the screen, where every second of this conversation was being recorded. Shaq's voice was steady. "Tell the world." Leo hesitated. Then he nodded. And just like that, the unseen became seen. The deeper Shaq went, the uglier the truth became. Leo led him through a side hallway past the patient rooms where people lay waiting, some for treatment, others simply for acknowledgement. Shaq kept his hood low, his presence deliberately quiet. Through a discreet service door marked "Authorized Personnel Only," Leo swiped his access card. The lock beeped and the door clicked open. Inside, the hospital felt different. The hum of desperation and suffering in the main halls disappeared. The air smelled like fresh coffee instead of disinfectant. The lighting was softer, the carpet thick beneath Shaq's feet. This wasn't a place where patients suffered. This was where the decisions were made. Leo locked the door behind them. "Welcome to the other side." They stepped into a sleek, modern office space, rows of glass-walled rooms, desks neatly arranged, computers humming softly. But the most striking feature? The silence. No chaotic nurses rushing, no desperate families begging for updates, no stretchers wheeling in emergencies. Just calm. Order. Efficiency. Leo led Shaq toward a corner office, swiping his card again. Another beep. Another door unlocked. Inside, the desk was immaculate, except for the two locked filing cabinets pushed against the far wall. Leo walked straight to them. These. He patted the top drawer. They hold the names of the people this hospital decided weren't worth the effort. Shaq's stomach tightened. You saying there's a list? Leo exhaled. More than one. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small key. I ain't stupid. Made my own copy before they resigned me. He slid the key into the lock and turned it. Click. Shaq opened the drawer. Inside, hundreds of files. Leo pulled out a thick folder labeled Low Priority Patients. He flipped it open, revealing a stack of names. Each one had a color-coded status next to it. Green, yellow, red. Shaq frowned. What do the colors mean? Leo's face darkened. Green means standard care. Yellow means delayed care unless necessary. Shaq already knew what was coming next. And red? Leo's fingers tightened around the folder. Red means ignore them. Shaq clenched his jaw. And Eleanor? Leo flipped through the pages, scanning names. Then he stopped. He turned the file around. There it was. Eleanor Carter, 82 years old, chest pains, no insurance. Next to her name, a red tag. Shaq felt something cold settle in his chest. She was never going to get help, Leo murmured. They flagged her the second she walked in. Shaq stared at the paper. It wasn't just one mistake. This wasn't about one bad nurse, one lazy doctor. This was a system. A machine built to ignore people like Eleanor. And someone with real power, was making sure it stayed that way. Shaq flipped through more pages. Hundreds of names. Some flagged yellow, some red. Some had tiny notes scribbled in the margins. Patient has limited coverage. Recommend low-cost prescriptions. Only approved treatment if family pays up front. No insurance. Suggest self-discharge. Shaq shook his head. They're choosing profit over people. Leo snorted. Of course they are. He pointed to a file labeled Executive Board Approvals. And those names? They're the ones signing off on it. Shaq grabbed the folder, flipping through its pages. He expected names of doctors, hospital administrators, maybe a few high-ranking officials. But then, one name stopped him cold. James Holloway. Shaq's fingers tightened around the page. He knew that name. Holloway wasn't a doctor. He wasn't even in healthcare. He was a real estate tycoon. A man who made his billions buying failing properties, flipping them, and turning them into luxury investments. Leo crossed his arms. You know him. Shaq nodded slowly. Yeah. And if his name is in these files, this hospital ain't just about healthcare. It's about business. Leo's face darkened. You think he owns this place? Shaq exhaled. Number, I think he owns what comes next. Shaq dug deeper into the files. Holloway's name kept popping up, not on medical records but on real estate contracts, renovation plans, property transfers. Leo scanned the papers. Hold up. These aren't just hospital documents. These are city contracts. Shaq nodded. Because this ain't just about denying treatment. It's about making sure the hospital fails. Leo frowned. Fails? Shaq pointed at the files. This place ain't profitable. Too many unpaid bills. Too many people like Eleanor who can't afford care. The board's been pushing for a buyout. Leo's eyes widened. And let me guess, Holloway's the one waiting to buy. Shaq's voice was firm. He doesn't want to run a hospital. He wants to tear it down. Leo ran a hand over his face. Damn. Shaq shut the folder, his mind already racing. Eleanor had almost died because some billionaire needed this place to look like a failure. And the worst part? It was working. Shaq slid the files into his hoodie. Leo raised a brow. What now? Shaq pulled his phone out of his pocket, checking the recording. Every name, every document, every word. Then he smirked. Now. He tucked the phone away. We make sure the world sees what's behind these doors. Shaq had seen greed before. He had dealt with businessmen who only cared about money, who treated people like numbers on a balance sheet. But Dr. Charles Hawthorne was a different breed. This wasn't just about money. This was about power. And Hawthorne had made a career out of deciding who mattered and who didn't. Hawthorne's office was on the top floor, far removed from the desperation of the emergency wing. Up here, the air was cleaner, the hallways quieter, the kind of place where decisions were made by people who never had to deal with the consequences. Leo led Shaq toward an alcove near the executive suites. No cameras here. Just outside Hawthorne's office, they waited. Through the glass wall, Hawthorne stood behind his massive oak desk, adjusting his cuffs. He was tall, lean, with sharp features and a suit that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Across from him, Victoria Langley, the same arrogant, dismissive head nurse who had humiliated Eleanor, stood with a smirk on her face, arms crossed. Shaq pulled out his phone, turned on the recording app, and let it run. Victoria scoffed, flipping through a patient file. Another one flagged red today. Poor thing sat in the waiting room for 6 hours before she collapsed. Hawthorne didn't even look up. And? Victoria chuckled. And nothing. We sent her home with some aspirin. She'll either come back with a real emergency or die in her sleep. Either way, not our problem. Shaq felt his stomach turn. Hawthorne smirked. That's the beauty of our system, Victoria. They come in, they suffer, and they leave. And if they can't afford real care? He shrugged. They were never supposed to survive anyway. Shaq's fists clenched. Did he just say that? Victoria smirked, flipping through another file. You know, I actually saw O'Neal in here today. Hawthorne's expression darkened. Shaquille O'Neal. Victoria nodded. Came in for a checkup. Didn't cause any trouble, but you never know with people like him. Hawthorne narrowed his eyes. People like him? Victoria smirked. You know, the ones who get too much attention. Big names, big voices. Hawthorne rolled his eyes. He's a washed-up athlete, Victoria. He's not a politician, not a businessman, and certainly not a threat. Shaq's grip on his phone tightened. Oh, really? Hawthorne continued, adjusting his cufflinks. The real threats are the people who fund these places, the ones who can pull the plug on our investments. Victoria raised a brow. You mean Holloway? Hawthorne gave her a pointed look. Don't say his name here. Victoria chuckled. Relax. It's not like anyone's listening. Shaq smirked. Oh, but someone was. Shaq had seen enough. He motioned for Leo to move. They slipped away from the executive wing, heading toward the stairwell. Once the door shut behind them, Shaq exhaled, his mind racing. They're running this place like a business, not a hospital. Leo nodded. Because to them, it is a business. Shaq glanced at his phone screen. Every word was recorded. The smug arrogance in Victoria's voice, the chilling indifference in Hawthorne's. Evidence. Leo exhaled. What's the plan? Shaq stared at the phone for a long moment. Then he grinned. The plan? He pocketed the phone. We make them regret ever thinking I wasn't a threat. Shaq knew he couldn't go straight to the media. Not yet. Hawthorne was too powerful. Holloway was even worse. If he leaked the recording now, they'd bury it. They'd call it out of context. They'd turn it into a misunderstanding. Number he needed more, so he made a call. David, he said as soon as his agent picked up, I need a favor. David Ross, his longtime agent, paused. Oh no. What now? Shaq smirked. How fast can you get me a meeting with the mayor? By the next afternoon, Shaq was sitting across from Mayor Evelyn Monroe in her downtown office. The woman was sharp, in her mid-50s, dressed in a navy blue power suit. She had seen corruption before. She had fought it. But she also knew how these things worked. Shaq played the recording. When it ended, Monroe exhaled sharply. She wasn't surprised, but she was angry. "You're telling me Holloway is trying to buy out that hospital?" she asked. Shaq nodded. Monroe clenched her jaw. "I knew he was moving in on healthcare properties, but I didn't realize it was this bad." Shaq leaned forward. "This isn't just about Holloway. This is about every patient who walked in there and was ignored." Monroe studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I'll see what I can do," she said. Shaq smirked. "Oh, I know you will." Hawthorne didn't know what hit him. By the next day, inspectors arrived at Mercy Hospital for a routine audit. Staff members who had spent years keeping their mouths shut suddenly had officials asking them questions. Doctors who had rubber-stamped discharge papers were now being investigated. And Hawthorne? He was furious. By the end of the week, whispers spread through the hospital. Something was happening. Victoria Langley was seen arguing with a board member. A few senior doctors mysteriously resigned. And Hawthorne? He made a call. Desperation looks like fear. Inside his office, Hawthorne's hands shook as he dialed. The call rang twice. Then, a deep voice answered. "James Holloway." Hawthorne exhaled. "We have a problem." There was a pause. Then Holloway's voice, cold as ice. "Then fix it." Hawthorne swallowed. "O'Neal's poking around. He's got recordings. I don't know how, but—" Holloway cut him off. "Handle it. Do whatever you have to. But make sure this goes away." The line went dead. Hawthorne set the phone down, his pulse hammering. Then, slowly, he smiled. Because if there was one thing he knew how to do, it was make problems disappear. Shaq didn't know it yet, but Hawthorne wasn't going down without a fight. And the next move was coming straight for him. Shaq had always been a man of action. He knew that power wasn't just about money or influence. It was about knowing when to use both to make a difference. And this was a moment that demanded all of it. The moment Shaq stepped out of Monroe's office, his phone was in his hand. He called people who mattered. Not just reporters, not just lawyers. He called owners, executives, decision-makers. People who could make a single phone call and turn a problem into a national conversation. Within an hour, news anchors were already getting tips. Within 3 hours, a legal team had started pulling records. By nightfall, social media was whispering about something big happening at Mercy Hospital. And by the next morning, it was everywhere. Shaquille O'Neal takes on Mercy Hospital, exposed for negligence? Is healthcare only for the rich? Bombshell reports say yes. Shaq wasn't just putting pressure on the hospital, he was making it impossible for them to hide. The air was thick with tension as Shaq walked into a small, dimly lit coffee shop on the city's east side. Sitting at a corner booth was Leo, the janitor who had risked everything to help him. Beside him, a journalist, Claire Maddox, and a grieving mother, Olivia Brooks. Claire was sharp-eyed, her notepad already out, pen tapping against the table. She had spent years digging up stories no one wanted told. Olivia, on the other hand, looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, hands gripping a photo of a young woman. Shaq slid into the booth. "Tell me everything." Olivia let out a shaky breath. "My daughter, Amber. She was 22. She had her whole life ahead of her." Her voice cracked. "She had a simple infection, something antibiotics could have fixed. But they ignored her." Shaq's jaw tightened. "Why?" Leo exhaled, crossing his arms. "Because she wasn't priority. No insurance, no connections. They let her suffer until it was too late." Claire leaned forward. "This isn't just one case, Shaq. It's a pattern, a system." She placed a folder on the table, flipping it open. Inside, names, dozens of them. people who had walked into Mercy Hospital needing help and left in worse condition. Some were denied care entirely. Others were given minimal treatment until their conditions spiraled. Some didn't make it out at all. Shaq's fingers curled into a fist. "This place doesn't just turn people away," Claire continued. "They bury complaints, cover up malpractice, pay off families to keep quiet." Olivia wiped a tear from her cheek. "They tried to pay me, too." Shaq inhaled sharply. "But you didn't take it." Olivia shook her head. Amber deserved better than hush money. Silence hung in the air. Then Shaq nodded. "All right, this ends now." While Shaq was gathering his army, Eleanor Carter was fading. She woke up in a cold, dimly lit room, the sharp scent of antiseptic stinging her nose. Her arms felt weak, her chest ached. She wasn't even in proper care. No nurses, no monitors beeping, no one checking in, like she had been tossed aside. Slowly, she turned her head. Across the room, a metal tray held a small cup of water and a few pills. No food, no explanation. A deep ache settled in her chest, not just from her illness but from something worse. A feeling she had known her whole life, being forgotten. A lump formed in her throat. Would she die here? Would anyone even know? Then, a familiar name echoed through the hospital hallways. Shaquille O'Neal. Her eyes fluttered open fully, and for the first time in hours, hope stirred in her chest. By the time Shaq stepped back into Mercy Hospital, he wasn't just a patient. He was an earthquake. Reporters had already gathered outside. Activists were calling for investigations. And inside, the staff was terrified. Shaq didn't speak. He didn't need to. He walked straight to the front desk, towering over the same smirking receptionist who had dismissed Eleanor before. She swallowed hard. "Mr. O'Neal, Shaq raised a hand. "Where is she?" The woman paled. Who?" Shaq leaned down slightly. "You know exactly who." She fumbled with the keyboard, typing quickly. Then hesitated. Her gaze flicked up to him, nervous. Shaq's stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. Then Leo stormed through the hallway, breathless. "You need to see this." Shaq didn't hesitate. He followed Leo down a side corridor past closed doors and silent patients, until they reached a locked room. Leo swiped a keycard and pushed the door open. Inside, Eleanor, alone, weak, abandoned. Shaq's chest burned with fury. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open. When she saw him, her lips trembled. "Big Shaq," she whispered. Shaq knelt beside her, taking her frail hand in his. "I got you," he murmured. Eleanor's fingers curled around his, tight, desperate. She had been waiting for someone to care, and now the whole world was about to. Outside, reporters had their cameras rolling. Inside, doctors and staff tried to keep their heads down. But they couldn't hide anymore. The truth was coming, and no amount of power, money, or corruption was going to stop it. Shaq turned to Leo. His voice was quiet but heavy. "Call Claire. Tell her it's time." Leo nodded, and just like that, the first domino fell. The air was electric. Not just in Mercy Hospital, not just in the city, everywhere. News channels ran the same breaking story over and over, anchors scrambling to keep up with the wildfire that had ignited overnight. Shaquille O'Neal goes live. Mercy Hospital scandal explodes. Exclusive footage. Patients humiliated, ignored. The system exposed. Profit over people. Shaq calls out hospital greed on national television. At first, it was just noise. Then, it became a movement. The studio lights were blinding, but Shaq wasn't fazed. He sat across from the most watched journalist in the country, his face unreadable, his presence unshakable. Millions of people tuned in, some expecting a PR stunt, some waiting for him to soften his stance. Instead, he dropped the hammer. The screen cut to footage from inside Mercy Hospital. Hidden camera clips, phone recordings, documents Leo had risked everything to get. It wasn't just bad service, it was deliberate neglect. Doctors ignoring critical patients while chatting about their weekend plans. Nurses rolling their eyes at elderly patients who begged for pain relief. Administrators prioritizing celebrity pets over human lives. And the worst of it, the whispers, the ones they thought no one would hear. These people come in, they suffer, they leave. It's not our problem. Low priority means no priority. If they can't pay, why waste the medicine? The final shot? Eleanor Carter, alone, forgotten. Left in a dimly lit room while the hospital paraded around its high-paying clients. The camera cut back to Shaq. He wasn't angry, he wasn't yelling. He was just looking into the camera, silent, unblinking, letting the world sit in what they had just seen. Then, finally, "This is real," he said, voice low but firm. "This is happening, and I'm not letting it slide." The world exploded. The #, Justice for Eleanor started trending within minutes. By the time the interview ended, it was global. People shared stories, their own hospital nightmares. Loved ones lost because they were deemed not profitable. Medical professionals, the good ones, started speaking out. This isn't new. This is just the first time someone powerful enough has shined a light on it. Protests erupted. Outside Mercy Hospital. People didn't just want apologies. They wanted heads to roll. And inside the hospital? Dr. Charles Hawthorne had never been afraid before. Not when he cut budgets that cost lives. Not when he rejected treatment requests to save profits. Not when he laughed at the people his hospital crushed. But now he was cornered. The board was calling. Sponsors were pulling out. Even his biggest political allies were distancing themselves. Mercy Hospital wasn't a pillar of elite healthcare anymore. It was a burning ship, and everyone was trying to escape. Victoria Langley, the arrogant head nurse, burst into Hawthorne's office, slamming the door behind her. Her face was ghost white. "We have a problem." Hawthorne's hands gripped his desk. "No kidding." Victoria threw a tablet onto his desk. It played Shaq's broadcast on repeat. "He's not stopping. He's dismantling us. We need to shut this down." Hawthorne exhaled through his nose, forcing himself to stay calm. "Damage control. Issue a public apology." Victoria's voice was sharp. "An apology won't cut it. Have you seen the protests? Have you seen the sponsors dropping us? We don't need PR. We need survival." Hawthorne's jaw tightened. "Then we fight back." Within hours, anonymous sources started appearing in the media. Whispers of Shaq isn't telling the full story. A fabricated accusation. Maybe Eleanor was already too sick. Maybe this wasn't Mercy's fault. The hospital scrambled to spin the narrative. But the problem? They underestimated Shaq. Because while they were playing dirty, he was playing bigger. Shaq didn't just let the lies spread. He smashed them. Live streaming directly to his millions of followers, he debunked every fake report. He brought Eleanor's family on camera. Let them tell the world who she really was. He released more footage, more testimonies. And then, the lawsuits hit. Not just one, dozens, former patients, families of those who never made it out, medical staff who had been forced to stay silent. Hawthorne's empire was crumbling. And still, Shaq wasn't done. Late one night in a private office, Hawthorne sat in silence. The walls around him, once symbols of his success, felt like a tomb. The door opened. Shaquille O'Neal walked in. No cameras, no reporters, just two men. One who built his wealth destroying lives, one who built his legacy lifting them up. Hawthorne leaned back in his chair, forced a smirk. "I assume you're here for some kind of deal." Shaq shook his head. "Nah." Hawthorne's smile faltered. "Then what do you want?" Shaq took his time, studied the man in front of him. Then, quietly, "I want you gone." Hawthorne scoffed. "That's not how this works, O'Neal. You don't just walk in here and—" Shaq slid a folder onto the desk. "Inside?" A federal investigation. Financial fraud? Cover-ups? More than enough to bury Hawthorne for good. The color drained from his face. Shaq's voice was calm but final. Your choice, Doc. Step down or go down. Silence. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Hawthorne swallowed and nodded. A week later, Dr. Charles Hawthorne resigned. Victoria Langley? Fired. Mercy Hospital? Under complete investigation. But the real victory, it didn't stop there. Because the fight had never been about one hospital, it was about all of them. Shaq launched a foundation dedicated to holding hospitals accountable. New laws were proposed. Investigations opened across the country. Eleanor Carter didn't just get justice, she became a symbol. Shaq stood outside Eleanor's house watching as her family helped her onto the porch. She looked stronger, not just healthier, whole. As she sat down, she looked up at Shaq with teary eyes. You really did all that. For me. Shaq knelt beside her, taking her hand. For you, he said softly, and for everyone they thought they could forget. Eleanor squeezed his fingers. You're a good man, Shaq. He smiled. I just don't like bullies. The cameras were gone. The reporters had moved on. But the impact? That would last forever. The conference room inside Mercy Hospital was packed. Not with doctors, not with patients, with judges, lawyers, investigators. And at the center of it all, Dr. Charles Hawthorne and Victoria Langley. The two people who had built an empire on neglect and greed now sat before the hospital board, exposed, humiliated, and out of excuses. The energy in the room was suffocating, not just because of the accusations hanging in the air, but because of the one person sitting at the witness table. Eleanor Carter. She was no longer the frail woman begging for care. She was standing tall, speaking clear, and she was about to deliver the words that would end them. Mrs. Carter, one of the attorneys said, adjusting his glasses, can you tell us, in your own words, what happened the day you were admitted to Mercy Hospital? Eleanor nodded, her hand steady on the table. I came in with chest pain, she began. I waited, and waited, and waited. Hours passed, and no one helped me. Hawthorne shifted in his seat. Victoria clenched her jaw. Eleanor glanced at them, but not with fear, with power. I was treated worse than a dog, she continued, not because the hospital was busy, not because they didn't have the resources, but because in their eyes, I wasn't worth it. Murmurs rippled through the room. Eleanor leaned forward. I was ignored, humiliated, and left to suffer, and I wasn't the only one. She reached into her purse, pulled out a list of names. Names of people who never got their justice, families who never got to tell their stories. She slid the list across the table. You see these names? Eleanor's voice was steady. Every one of them deserved better. And now, the world knows it. The attorney took the list, nodded, and turned to Dr. Hawthorne. Dr. Hawthorne, do you deny any of these claims? Hawthorne's face was red, his lips pressed into a thin line. He hesitated. I had no direct knowledge of these specific cases. A laugh broke out from the back of the room. Shaq. Seated with his arms crossed, he shook his head. No knowledge? Shaq's voice was calm, but the weight behind it was undeniable. Man, I got your own recording saying otherwise. A screen on the wall lit up. Security footage, emails, text messages. The truth, undeniable, inescapable. Hawthorne sank in his chair. Victoria swallowed hard. They had nowhere left to hide. The hospital board, desperate to save itself, acted swiftly. Dr. Hawthorne, stripped of his medical license, facing a federal investigation. Victoria Langley, fired, blacklisted from ever working in healthcare again. Mercy Hospital, forced into full-scale reform. But the real moment of justice came when Leo Saunders was called forward, the janitor who had once been a brilliant medical student. the man whose future had been stolen by this very system. A hospital board member cleared his throat. "Mr. Saunders, we've reviewed your case. We understand the wrongful circumstances surrounding your dismissal from medical school." Leo sat up straighter. His heart pounded. The board member glanced at Shaq, then back at Leo. "We'd like to offer you a fully funded reinstatement, if you'd be willing to return." Leo's breath hitched. Shaq smiled. Leo swallowed hard, blinking back emotion. "Yeah," he said, voice rough. "I'd like that." The press swarmed the courthouse as Eleanor, Leo, and Shaq stepped outside. A reporter pushed forward. Shaq, do you feel like justice was served today?" Shaq glanced at Eleanor, at Leo, at the people who weren't invisible anymore. He exhaled, then looked back at the cameras. "This ain't just about one hospital," he said. "This is about every person who's ever been told their life don't matter because they ain't rich enough. Today, we changed the game." A roar of cheers erupted from the crowd. Shaq turned to Eleanor, nodding. "Ready to go home?" he asked. Eleanor smiled, looping her arm through his. "Lead the way, big guy." As they walked away, the sun shined down on them, because for the first time in a long time, mercy was finally real. The dust had settled, but the impact, it was just beginning. Mercy Hospital was no longer the place where only the wealthy survived. Its entire foundation had been torn down and rebuilt, not with greed, but with integrity. And standing at the center of it all, Shaquille O'Neal, not as a celebrity, not as an investor, but as a man who refused to let injustice win. Inside the hospital's newly renovated lobby, the air felt different. The walls, once cold and unwelcoming, now held portraits of the very people who had been ignored, patients who had fought, survived, and demanded change. At the entrance, a new plaque was mounted, the Eleanor Carter Medical Ethics Program, funded by Shaq, built to make sure no patient was ever deemed unworthy again. Leo Saunders, now wearing his white coat, stood in front of it, adjusting his stethoscope. A nurse walked by, nodding at him with respect. "Dr. Saunders." He still wasn't used to hearing it. He had been a janitor in this building once, scrubbing floors, cleaning up after the very people who had denied him his future. Now, he was a doctor, and he wasn't just here to work. He was here to make sure no one else was ever pushed aside like he had been. In a quiet corner of the hospital's new garden, Eleanor Carter sat on a bench, watching the world move on. A year ago, she had been left to suffer in this very place. Today, she was the reason it had changed. Shaq sat beside her, resting his massive hands on his knees, watching the sun dip below the skyline. Eleanor turned to him. "You didn't have to do all this, you know." Shaq exhaled, a small smile playing on his lips. "Yeah, I did." Eleanor chuckled. "You're one stubborn man." Shaq grinned. "So, I've been told." A moment of silence passed, comfortable and heavy with meaning. Then Eleanor spoke again, softer this time. "You didn't just save me, Shaq. You reminded the world what kindness looks like." Shaq didn't respond right away, because for the first time in this entire battle, he realized what this had all been about. Not money, not power, but the choice to do something when others chose to look away. As Shaq left the hospital that evening, he paused at the doors, looking back at what they had built. Not just a new Mercy Hospital, but a new standard, one that other hospitals were now being pressured to follow, one that proved change was possible when the right people refused to stay silent. The cameras outside flashed as reporters tried to get a final word from him. But Shaq didn't stop. He didn't need to say anything, because this wasn't just a victory. It was a reminder. Power isn't about money. It's about what you do with it. Some fights aren't won in the ring. They're won in the streets, in boardrooms, and in the moments when someone chooses to stand instead of walk away. This isn't just a story. It's a mirror, a reminder that power isn't in money. It's in voice, in action, in refusing to let injustice go unchecked. So the real question is, when the moment comes, will you watch or will you step in?